Greg thought leaving me stranded at a rotting gas station 97 miles from home was the perfect punishment for my disobedience. As his taillights faded into the shimmering Nevada heat, he believed he had finally broken me. He was wrong. He did not realize that by driving away, he had just handed me the keys to his destruction. I was not the one trapped in the middle of nowhere. He was the one walking into a trap he built himself. My name is Elena, and I stood perfectly still as the oppressive heat of the Nevada desert wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. The midday sun beat down on my shoulders, but the chill spreading through my chest had nothing to do with the temperature. I watched the black SUV tear down the asphalt, the personalized license plate shrinking until it was nothing but a speck of dust against the shimmering horizon. My husband, Greg, 40 years old and supposedly a pillar of the community, had just floored the accelerator and left me stranded at a crumbling, dust-choked gas station ironically named The Last Stop. The silence that followed was heavy. Just 10 minutes ago, the air inside that luxury vehicle had been thick with his shouting. He had been pounding the steering wheel, his face twisted in that familiar, ugly rage. "It is just a signature. Elena," he had screamed, his spit flying onto the dashboard. "Apex Horizons is going to explode. I need to leverage the inheritance now, or we miss the window. You are so selfish." "I told you no," I had replied, my voice shaking but firm. That house was my mother's legacy. It is not collateral for another one of your visionary projects that never manifests. That was the breaking point. He had slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the gravel shoulder. He reached across the console, not to hold me, but to shove me. In the scuffle, he had grabbed my purse and hurled it out the open door into the dirt. When I scrambled out to retrieve it, he locked the doors. The window rolled down just an inch, enough for his cold, blue eyes to pin me to the spot. "You stand here and think about it properly," he had sneered, his voice dangerously low. "When you learn your place, maybe you can find your own way back or call begging for me to come get you." I looked down at my purse lying in the red dust. I picked it up, dusting off the grime. My hands were trembling, not from the heat, but from the adrenaline crashing through my system. I dug inside and pulled out my phone. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, shattered when he threw the bag. I pressed the power button. Nothing. It was dead. I checked my wallet. He had taken my credit cards weeks ago for safekeeping, leaving me with 3 $20 bills and some loose change. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat. I was 97 miles from home. I was alone, but as I touched the cool silver pendant resting against my sternum, the panic abruptly shifted into something sharper, colder. It was a USB drive disguised as jewelry, holding encrypted backups of every illicit transaction Greg had made through Apex Horizons. He thought he had stripped me of my resources, but I was wearing his destruction around my neck. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a lover's quarrel. This was the final act of a narcissist who realized he was losing control. He wanted me broken. He wanted me to walk into that desert heat and come back crawling, grateful for his scraps. I turned my back on the empty road and walked toward the diner attached to the gas station. The bell above the door jingled weakly. The air inside smelled of stale grease and old coffee. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with skin like leather and eyes that had seen too much. Old Pete. He was wiping a glass with a rag that looked as tired as he did. He had watched the whole thing through the window. "Coffee?" Pete asked, his voice rough. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. "Please," I said, sliding onto a torn vinyl stool. "And I need to use your phone. Mine is broken. Local call." "No," I said, my voice steadying. "Long distance. I did not call the police. I did not call Greg. I dialed a number I had memorized 6 months ago, the day I found the second phone in Greg's briefcase. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Sterling Law Office." "It is me," I said, clutching the receiver so hard my knuckles turned white. Initiate the protocol. He did it. He actually did it. I hung up and walked into the cramped, dirty restroom at the back of the diner. The mirror was cracked and spotted with age. I looked at the woman staring back at me. Her hair was windblown, her designer blouse dusted with Nevada sand. I took a tissue and wiped the smeared lipstick from the corner of my mouth. Greg expected a terrified wife to be waiting by the roadside when he decided to show mercy and return. He expected tears. He expected surrender. I looked into my own eyes in the glass, and a cold smile touched my lips. I was not going back to that house. Elena, the obedient wife, died the moment those taillights vanished. I was going to disappear, and I was taking his entire world with me. 10 years of marriage can feel like a lifetime when you are the only one carrying the weight of it. As I sat on the torn vinyl stool of that roadside diner, watching the dust settle where my husband's car had been, I let the memories wash over me. They were not warm. They were cold and sharp, like the ice in the glass of water old Pete had placed in front of me. I was not always this silent shadow of a woman. A decade ago, I was a shark in the financial sector. I could analyze data streams and predict market fluctuations before the opening bell rang on Wall Street. But then I met Greg. He was charming, ambitious, and utterly incompetent when it came to the actual mechanics of business. I fell for the potential I saw in him, not the reality. Slowly, methodically, I stepped back. I became the supportive wife, the invisible engine room behind the shiny yacht that was his career. Greg was a hollow man wrapped in expensive Italian wool. Every successful merger, every brilliant strategic pivot that Apex Horizons had made in the last 5 years, those were my ideas. They were born on our dining room table at 2 a.m. while he snored in the bedroom. He would wake up, take my notes, present them to the board, and bask in the applause. I stayed home. I made sure his shirts were crisp. I made sure his ego was fed. And how did he repay me? The signs had been there for months. The late nights at the office when I knew the workload was light. The scent of vanilla and desperation clinging to his jacket, a perfume far too sweet for any client meeting. And the insults. They started small, disguised as jokes, before morphing into cruel jabs. "You have it so easy. Elena," he would say, sipping the scotch I poured for him. "You just sit here while I go out and conquer the world. You are a leech. Honestly, sometimes I wonder what you even bring to this table." While I was reliving the slow death of my self-esteem, Greg was speeding down the highway toward Phoenix. I did not need a tracker to know what he was doing. I knew the script he was following in his head. He was likely tapping the steering wheel, fueled by a toxic mix of adrenaline and narcissism. He believed he had won. He thought that by leaving me in the desert, he had stripped me of my dignity. He imagined that when he returned, or when I finally clawed my way back home, I would be broken enough to sign the mortgage papers. He probably pulled out his phone the moment he had cell service. He would not call me. He would call her Monica. She was 24 years old, an Instagram model whose primary talent seemed to be spending money she did not earn. "It is done, babe," he would be saying, his voice thick with unearned pride. "The old hag is being trained. She is stuck in the middle of nowhere. By the time she gets back, she will sign anything I put in front of her. The money is coming. Just wait." He had no idea that while he was fantasizing about his victory, a black sedan with tinted windows was pulling into the dusty lot of the last stop. It was not a random car. It was the extraction team from a private security firm I had retained 6 months ago, paid for through a shell corporation. The driver, a man with a face like stone, stepped out and opened the rear door. I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the counter for Pete. I did not look back at the diner. I did not look back at the desert. I slid into the cool leather interior of the car. The air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the Nevada heat. "Mrs. Sterling," the driver said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "We are ready. Execute Ghost Protocol," I said. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but powerful. "I am not going home. Take me to the safe house." As the car glided onto the highway, moving in the opposite direction of my husband, I opened the slim laptop that had been prepared for me. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I accessed the back end of our joint financial accounts. The screen illuminated my face with the cold blue light of truth. There they were, a series of pending transfers Greg had queued up, totaling millions of dollars, just waiting for the liquidity from the house mortgage he tried to force me to sign. He had already spent the money in his mind. He had set the trap for me, but as I watched the cursor blink, I realized he had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who built the trap, and now I was going to be the one to spring it. Greg pulled into the driveway of our pristine suburban villa just before midnight. From the safety of my temporary command center miles away, I could almost feel the smug satisfaction radiating off him. He walked into the silent house, the emptiness echoing off the marble floors. He did not panic. He did not worry. Instead, he went straight to the wine cellar, uncorked a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir that I had been saving for a special occasion, and poured himself a generous glass. He likely toasted to the silence, believing I was currently sobbing on a Greyhound bus or hitchhiking with blistered feet, learning the hard lesson he had so graciously taught me. He slept soundly that night, sprawling across the entire king-sized bed, enjoying the freedom of a man who thought he had discarded a piece of unwanted luggage. When the sun rose the next morning, the reality of the situation began to tickle the edges of his consciousness, but his ego kept it at bay. I was still not there. He probably checked the guest room and the kitchen, finding them empty. Irritation replaced his satisfaction. In his mind, I was being dramatic. I was probably hiding at a friend's house, waiting for him to call and apologize so I could return to my comfortable cage. He refused to give me that satisfaction. He dressed in his best suit, ready to conquer the world, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already turned into quicksand. Then the first domino fell. His phone rang while he was knotting his tie. It was not me. It was a fraud prevention officer from the bank, Mr. Sterling, the voice would have said. "We have detected unusual activity on the joint accounts. For security purposes, we have frozen all assets pending verification." I watched the alert flash on my laptop screen in the safe house. I sat in an ergonomically designated chair, surrounded by monitors, sipping hot tea. With a few keystrokes, I had not only flagged the accounts but also reset the primary passwords. Since the inheritance and the initial capital for his company came from my family, my name was the primary authority on every single account. He was merely an authorized user, a privilege I had just revoked. I could imagine him scrambling to his computer, his fingers flying across the keys, only to be met with the red text, "Access denied." 24 hours bled away. The irritation in Greg's chest was replaced by a cold knot of genuine fear. He finally tried to call me. The line went dead instantly. I had already deactivated the SIM card. He began calling my friends, his voice tight, trying to sound casual. "Hey, is Elena there? She is being difficult. We had a small disagreement and she stormed off. No one had seen me. No one had heard from me. It was time to tighten the noose." I nodded to my lawyer, who sat across the room from me. She picked up a burner phone and sent a pre-written anonymous tip to the local police department. The message was specific. "Saw a black SUV dump a woman in the desert near the last stop gas station. Driver looked like he was in a hurry." An hour later, 2 uniformed officers knocked on the heavy oak door of our home. Greg opened it, looking disheveled. I was not there to see his face, but I knew the color would have drained from it the moment he saw the badges. "Mr. Sterling, we are following up on a report regarding your wife," one officer said. "Is she home?" Greg was suddenly trapped in a nightmare of his own making. I had forced him into a split-second decision that would seal his fate. If he told the truth that he left me 97 miles away without water or a phone, he would be arrested for reckless endangerment or worse. If he lied, and I turned up dead or injured, he would be the prime suspect in a homicide investigation. He looked at the officers. He looked at the empty driveway. His survival instinct, warped by narcissism, made the choice for him. No, she is not here, Greg stammered, his eyes darting away from the officer's gaze. We had a fight last night, here at the house. She packed a bag and walked out. I have not seen her since. Do you know where she went? I don't know. He lied, his voice trembling with false concern. I thought she went to her mother's old place, but I am worried. The moment the words left his mouth, he had locked the cell door from the inside. He had just gone on official record with a fabrication that I could disprove with a single timestamp. The trap was sprung. The news cycle did not just break, it detonated. By mid-morning, the headline, "Wife of Apex Horizons, CEO Missing Under Suspicious Circumstances," was running across every major network ticker. From the shadows of my safe house, I orchestrated the flow of information with the precision of a conductor. I was no longer the victim stranded in the desert. I was the ghost in the machine, and Greg was about to learn that the internet has no mercy. My private investigator had done his job perfectly. Hours before the police could even petition for a warrant to check remote surveillance feeds, my team had already secured the footage from the last stop gas station and anonymously leaked it to a prominent crime blogger. The video was grainy, but the narrative was crystal clear. It showed Greg's distinctive black SUV peeling out of the lot, leaving a solitary, petite figure standing amidst the dust. The timestamp on the video was undeniable. It directly contradicted the statement Greg had given to the police just 12 hours prior, where he claimed we had fought at home and I had walked out the front door. The public reaction was instantaneous and violent. The hashtag Findalina began to trend within minutes. Greg went from being a concerned husband to a pariah. His lie had been exposed, and the internet sleuths were tearing his life apart piece by piece. I monitored his communications through a cloned version of his messaging app. I watched the panic set in, not just for him, but for Monica. The pressure was getting to her. Greg, they are posting my picture on forums. Monica's text read, followed by a string of crying emojis. People are calling me a homewrecker. They found my address. I cannot do this. We are done. Greg's reply was immediate and vicious. You are not going anywhere. If I go down, you go down with me. Keep your mouth shut and stay inside. Do not answer the door. While Greg was busy fighting fires on his personal front, his professional world was collapsing. I watched the stock charts on my second monitor. Apex Horizons was in free fall. Investors were pulling out by the millions. The board members, who usually turned a blind eye to Greg's abrasive personality as long as the profits came in, were now scrambling to distance themselves from a potential murderer. Then came the performance I had been waiting for. Greg called an emergency press conference outside our villa. I sat back in my chair, sipping hot tea, and turned up the volume. He stood before a wall of microphones, looking suitably disheveled. He had foregone his usual gelled hair for a messy look, trying to sell the image of a man broken by grief. I just want my wife home, Greg choked out, wiping away a tear that I knew he had practiced in the mirror. Elena, if you are watching this, please, we can work it out. I love you. I just want to know you are safe. You love yourself, I whispered to the screen, my voice devoid of pity. And you are losing him too. At the exact moment he finished his plea for sympathy, I hit send on an email I had drafted days ago. It was addressed to the entire board of directors of Apex Horizons. The subject line was simple: financial discrepancies and executive misconduct. Attached were 50 pages of documents proving that Greg had been siphoning company funds to pay for Monica's luxury apartment, her car, and his own significant gambling debts. The fallout was immediate. The police, emboldened by the contradictory video evidence and the sudden shift in public sentiment, arrived at the house with a search warrant. I watched the live aerial feed as the officers swarmed the property. Inside the house, I knew exactly what was happening. Greg would be in a state of absolute terror. He would be sprinting to his study, locking the door, and rushing to the painting of the ship that hung behind his desk. He would move it aside to reveal the hidden wall safe. He needed to destroy the physical ledger, the black book where he kept the handwritten notes of his illegal dealings, just in case the digital files were compromised. I imagined the look on his face when he spun the dial and swung the heavy steel door open. Where is it? Where is the ledger, he would gasp, his hands clawing at the empty metal shelf. He would find nothing. The safe was empty. I had cleaned it out 3 days before the trip to the desert, taking every passport, every diamond, and every incriminating document he owned. He was searching for a lifeline, but I had already cut the rope. The police interrogation lasted 4 hours. From the comfort of my safe house, I received updates from my lawyer, who had a source inside the precinct. Greg walked out of the station not in handcuffs, but looking heavier, as if the gravity of his situation was finally pulling him down to earth. He was not under arrest yet, but he was officially a person of interest. I could imagine the conversation in the hallway between Greg and his attorney, a man named Miller who charged $500 an hour for his mediocrity. Miller would be sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. You have to understand the optics. Greg, Miller likely whispered, his voice trembling. If she does not show up, if she is found dead, they will charge you with manslaughter. Maybe murder 1. You need to find her. Greg left the station and tried to salvage the only thing that still mattered to him, his image. He drove to a high-end bistro, perhaps thinking a stiff drink and a steak would settle his nerves. When the bill came, he slapped down his exclusive black credit card, the titanium one he loved to flash at business dinners. A moment later, the waiter returned, looking uncomfortable. I saw the transaction decline notification pop up on my screen instantly. I am sorry, sir. The waiter would have said, the card was declined. That is impossible. Greg would have snapped, his arrogance flaring up. Try it again. Do you know who I am? It was declined again. Greg did not know that I was the primary guarantor on that account. I had secured it years ago using my family trust as collateral. With a single click earlier that morning, I had reported the card stolen and severed his access. He had to leave the restaurant humiliated, paying with the crumpled cash he had in his pocket. Things got worse before he even reached the car. I switched tabs on my laptop to watch the live stream that was currently trending #1 on social media. It was Monica. She sat in her bedroom, no makeup, eyes puffy, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I didn't know. She sobbed into the camera, her voice cracking. He told me they were separated. He told me she was crazy. I am a victim here too. Please stop sending me threats. He is a monster. She had thrown him to the wolves to save her own skin. In one 10-minute video, she confirmed the affair and painted Greg as a manipulative predator. When Greg finally pulled into our driveway, the headlights illuminated the final insult. Someone had sprayed the words murderer in bright red paint across the garage door. He sat in his car for a long time. When he finally entered the house, it was dark and cold. The silence was deafening. There was no dinner waiting, no clean shirts, no one to manage the chaos of his life. For the first time, the hunger and the fear were real. He was realizing that without me, he was just a child in a suit. Then, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with an express package. I watched through the hidden security camera in the foyer as he tore open the envelope. His hands were shaking. Out slid my shattered smartphone, the screen a spiderweb of cracks, and a single piece of cream-colored cardstock. He read the note aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the empty hall. 97 miles is a long way to walk, but it is a short distance to see through a person's heart. He froze. The realization washed over him like ice water. I was not dead. I was not lost. I was watching him. Elena, he screamed at the ceiling, his face twisting from relief to unbridled rage. You bitch! I know you can hear me. You are doing this. He stormed into his office and booted up his laptop. Within minutes, my inbox began to ping. Subject, please, Elena. Baby, please stop this. I was scared. I made a mistake. Come home and we can fix this. 5 minutes later, subject, you will pay if you think you can humiliate me like this. I will destroy you. I will burn that inheritance to the ground. And finally, 10 minutes later, the desperation set in. Subject, the company. They are going to audit us. Elena, I need you to sign the papers. The whole thing is going to collapse if you don't help me. Please, just tell me what you want. I took a sip of my tea and closed the laptop. Let him wait. He was finally understanding the true definition of being stranded. I did not reply to his begging emails. I did not reply to his threats. Silence is a weapon, and I was wielding it with surgical precision. Instead of a text message, I sent a shark to his doorstep. Her name was Mrs. Sterling, my lead attorney, a woman who regarded empathy as a character flaw she had corrected decades ago. At 9 a.m, Mrs. Sterling stood on the porch of the home I had paid for. Through the security feed, I watched Greg open the door. He looked like a ghost of the man who had driven away from me in the desert. His eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt that had clearly been slept in. Mrs. Sterling did not wait for an invitation. She walked past him into the living room and placed a single crisp document on the coffee table. The offer is simple. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. Elena is alive. She is willing to make a public appearance within 24 hours to clear you of any suspicion regarding her disappearance or potential murder. The police will back off. The media will calm down. Greg let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. Thank God. Where is she? Tell her to come home. There is a condition. Sterling cut in, sliding a pen across the mahogany surface. You sign the divorce papers today, and you sign over 100% of your equity in Apex Horizons to Elena. Full control. Uncontested. The relief on Greg's face shattered instantly, replaced by the volatile temper that had defined our marriage. He grabbed the document and ripped it in half, throwing the pieces like confetti. Are you insane? Greg screamed, his voice cracking. I built Apex. That is my company. She is just a housewife. I am not giving her my life's work, just because she decided to play hide and seek. Mrs. Sterling did not flinch. She simply reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker folder. She dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. That was the mercy offer, Sterling said calmly. This is the reality. Greg stared at the folder. He opened it, and I saw his hands begin to tremble. Inside were 5 years of bank records. It detailed every dollar he had siphoned from the company accounts to avoid taxes, every bribe he had paid to local zoning officials, and the complex money laundering scheme he had set up to hide his gambling losses. I believe the term is federal prison, Sterling said, checking her watch. Tax fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Elena has been documenting your creativity for 5 years. She has the originals. This is just a copy. Greg looked up, his face pale. She set me up. She prepared for the inevitable. Sterling corrected him. So, here is your new choice. Option A is you lose the company to Elena, but you stay a free man. Option B is the Internal Revenue Service takes you away for 20 years, and you lose the company anyway. You have 1 hour to decide, as if the universe was conspiring with me. Greg's phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification I had timed perfectly. because I had stopped paying the mortgage from the joint account weeks ago, an account he never checked because he assumed the bills just magically paid themselves. The bank had officially flagged the loan. Greg looked at the screen. A notice of foreclosure proceedings. He had 48 hours to vacate or pay the arrears, which amounted to $50,000 he did not have. He sank onto the sofa, burying his head in his hands. He was cornered. He had no money. He was about to lose his home, and he was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Desperate, he reached for his phone and dialed the one number he thought would never fail him. His parents. I turned up the volume on the feed. "Mom," Greg pleaded, his voice breaking. "I need help. I need a loan. It is a misunderstanding, but I need cash now." I could hear his mother's voice on the other end, sharp and cold. "We saw the news. Gregory, they are calling you a murderer. The neighbors are talking. We cannot be associated with this scandal. Do not call us until you clear your name." The line went dead. Greg dropped the phone. He looked around the empty living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He was truly alone. I took a sip of water, watching him crumble. He had left me stranded 97 miles from home with a bottle of water, but I had left him stranded in the middle of civilization with absolutely nothing. The call came at 2 in the afternoon. Greg had finally broken. He called Mrs. Sterling, his voice thick with defeat, and agreed to every single term. He did not care about the money anymore. He just wanted the police off his back and the media trucks off his lawn. He wanted the narrative to change. He wanted his life back, or at least the scrap of it that remained. We arranged a press conference at the Four Seasons downtown for 5 o'clock that evening. It was the perfect stage for the final act of our tragedy. Before I left the safe house, I stood before the full-length mirror for one last inspection. The woman who had cried over burnt toast was gone. I had cut my hair. The long, soft waves that Greg always insisted I keep were severed, replaced by a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed my jawline like a blade. I traded my sensible cardigans for a tailored, navy blue power suit that cost $4,000. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a predator. I arrived at the hotel a notification ahead of the press. Greg was waiting in a private holding room down the hall from the ballroom. I watched him through the cracked door before I entered. He looked ravaged. His eyes were sunken into dark hollows. His skin was gray, and that expensive Italian suit hung off his frame like it was 2 sizes too big. He was pacing, muttering to himself, wringing his hands. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The click of my heels on the parquet floor sounded like gunshots in the silence. Greg spun around. For a second, he did not even recognize me. Then, recognition dawned, followed immediately by a flare of that old, pathetic rage. "You." He snarled, his face twisting into a snarl. He took a step toward me, his hands curling into fists. "You evil." He didn't get far. 2 of my private security detail stepped out from the shadows of the doorway, blocking his path with the solidity of a brick wall. Greg stopped, chest heaving, impotent and furious. "Sit down, Greg," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and utterly devoid of the fear he was used to hearing. He slumped into a chair, looking up at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He looked at the divorce papers and the asset transfer deeds laid out on the table between us. "Why?" Greg asked, his voice shaking. "Why did you do this just because I left you at a gas station? You destroyed my life over a 20-minute drive." I walked over to the table and leaned in, my hands resting on the polished wood. I looked deep into his bloodshot eyes. "No," I said softly. "You didn't just leave me at a gas station, Greg. You abandoned me in this marriage 10 years ago. You left me alone to fix your messes, to build your ego, to hide your affairs. The last stop was just the place where I finally decided I was not going to hitchhike in your car anymore." Greg stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked for a trace of the woman he used to bully. but he found only a stranger. "Sign it," I commanded, "or I walk out that door." And the police walk in. His hand trembled violently as he picked up the pen. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at the clause that stripped him of Apex Horizons, the company he claimed to love more than me. But self-preservation won. It always does with men like him. He scribbled his signature on the divorce decree. Then he signed the asset transfer. He dropped the pen and looked up, a pathetic hope rising in his eyes. He thought the transaction was over. He thought that by signing, he had bought my silence and my support on the stage outside. "There," Greg whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "It is done. Now we go out there and you tell them it was a misunderstanding. You tell them I am a good husband." I picked up the folder, checking the signatures to ensure they were valid. I snapped the folder shut and tucked it under my arm. "Transaction complete," I said, and a smile slowly spread across my face. It was not a nice smile. Now comes the part for the public. The ballroom of the Four Seasons was packed so tight that the air felt thin, recycled through the lungs of 200 hungry reporters. Camera flashes popped like strobe lights, creating a disorienting, rhythmic assault on the eyes. Greg stood by the podium, his posture slumped just enough to suggest humility without looking weak. He was putting on the performance of his life. He looked at me with eyes that pleaded for me to stick to the script we had silently agreed upon in the holding room. He believed that because he had signed the papers, he had bought his freedom. He thought I was about to tell the world that I had suffered a mental break and wandered into the desert, and he was the loving husband who had been worried sick. I walked to the microphone. The silence that fell over the room was instant and heavy. I looked out at the sea of lenses and expectant faces. I looked at Greg, who gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I gripped the sides of the podium. The wood felt cool under my palms. "My husband," I began, my voice clear and steady, projecting to the back of the room, "wants you to believe that I was lost. He wants you to believe that the last 48 hours have been a tragic misunderstanding caused by stress and dehydration." Greg exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. He thought this was the preamble to my confession. "But that is a lie," I said, shifting my gaze directly into the camera lens with the red recording light. "I was not lost. I was abandoned. I was left stranded 97 miles from safety by a man who intended to use my absence to steal my inheritance and seize control of my family's assets." The room erupted. It wasn't just a murmur. It was a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen out of the space. Greg froze. His face went slack, the color draining from his skin until he looked like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. Elena Gregg hissed, stepping toward me, forgetting his microphone was still hot. What are you doing?" "We had a deal. We had a transaction," I corrected him, not stepping back. "And I have the receipt." I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pointed it at the large projection screen behind us. I had uploaded the file to the AV team myself 10 minutes ago. It was the dashcam footage from the day he left me. He had deleted the local file, but he was technologically illiterate. He never realized the camera automatically backed up to the cloud account I managed. The audio boomed through the ballroom speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "You are useless." Elena Gregg's voice screamed from the speakers, filled with venom. "Without me, you would starve. You are nothing but a leech." Then came the sound of the car door slamming and tires screeching against gravel. The reporters were frenzied now. Questions were being shouted over one another, a cacophony of accusations. Greg looked like a trapped animal. He looked at his lawyer, then at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. "How could you?" he stammered, his hands shaking. "I signed." "I gave you everything." "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, cutting through the noise, "I have filed formal charges against Gregory Sterling for domestic abuse, endangerment, and extortion. Furthermore, as of 5 o'clock this evening, I am the sole owner of Apex Horizons. Mr. Sterling has been removed from all executive functions effective immediately. Greg opened his mouth to scream, to protest, to spin another lie, but he never got the chance. The side doors swung open, and 4 officers from the Federal Bureau of Investigation marched in. They were not the local cops Greg had charmed. These were federal agents in windbreakers that meant business. They had the files I had given Mrs. Sterling. They walked straight onto the stage, ignoring the cameras. "Gregory Sterling," the lead agent announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." Greg stumbled back, knocking over a pitcher of water. No, she is lying. It is her company, too. She knew. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent ordered. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It cut through the camera shutters like a knife. Greg was hauled off the stage, his polished shoes dragging on the carpet. He twisted his neck around, his face purple with rage and terror, looking for me. "Elena," he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. "Elena, help me. You cannot do this. I am your husband." I stood at the podium, perfectly still, watching him being dragged into the darkness of the hallway. I did not look away. I did not blink. Justice is not blind. Today, she was staring right at him in high definition. The house was silent when I returned, but for the first time in a decade, the silence did not feel oppressive. It felt expansive. I walked through the front door of the villa, my heels clicking on the marble floor that I now owned outright. I looked up at the high ceilings and the crystal chandelier. It used to feel like a golden cage, a place where I was displayed and stored like one of Greg's trophies. Now, it felt like oxygen. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, reclaiming the space. The ghost of Greg was still here, lingering in the scent of his cologne in the hallway. But I was about to exorcise him completely. The first step was a purge. I called the household staff into the living room. These were people who had looked the other way while Greg brought women into our home, who had nodded politely while he berated me at the dinner table. "You are all terminated, effective immediately," I said, handing them envelopes with their final severance checks. "You were loyal to the wrong person." I watched them leave without a word. By noon, I had a cleaning crew stripping the guest rooms and a new personal assistant setting up a command center in Greg's old office. I was scrubbing his fingerprints off my life. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. It was a number I did not recognize, but the preview message made my stomach turn. It was Monica. "Elena, we need to talk. I have info on Greg's offshore accounts. We can make a deal. I just want $50,000. I stared at the screen. She was like a rat swimming from a sinking ship, trying to climb onto the lifeboat she had helped drill holes in. She thought we were allies because we had both been used by him. She was wrong. I did not need trash to take out the garbage. I pressed the block button without replying. She was irrelevant. The hardest part came the next morning. I drove to the detention center to see him one last time. It was a sterile, gray building that smelled of industrial cleaner and misery. When they brought Greg into the visitation room, he looked like he had aged 20 years in 48 hours. His hair was greasy, his skin was sallow, and the arrogance that used to radiate from him was replaced by a frantic, twitching energy. He picked up the phone on his side of the glass. His hands were shaking. "Elena," he breathed, his eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. "You have to help me. The lawyer. He says I am looking at 15 years. 15 years I cannot survive in here." I sat perfectly still. The receiver pressed to my ear. "You should have thought about that before you cooked the books." "Greg." "It wasn't me," he cried, his voice rising in panic. "It was the pressure. The board expected miracles. I had to do it, and Monica. She made me spend that money. She seduced me. I am the victim here, Elena, I am sick. I need help, not prison. He was still doing it, even in an orange jumpsuit, behind reinforced glass. He could not take responsibility. It was everyone else's fault. You told me something in the desert, I said, cutting through his rambling. You told me to stand there and think. You told me to find my own way back. Greg stopped. He stared at me, his lip trembling. I didn't mean it like that. You were right. Greg, I continued, my voice cold and even. I learned how to find my way back. And it turns out, the road home went right through the destruction of your ambition. What are you talking about? He whispered. Apex horizons, I said. I am not keeping it. I am not running it. I am dissolving it. His eyes went wide. You can't. That is my legacy. That is my name. I am selling off the assets piece by piece, I told him, enjoying the way the color drained from his face. And I am using 100% of the proceeds to start a nonprofit foundation. It will provide legal aid and financial support to women who are victims of economic abuse. Every dollar you stole to build your empire is going to help women destroy men like you. No, Greg gasped, slamming his hand against the glass. No, you are erasing me. Exactly, I said, standing up. The prison sentence is just the law doing its job. My punishment is far worse. I am going to make sure that in 10 years, no one remembers your name. You will not be a famous CEO. You will not even be a famous criminal. You will be nothing. I hung up the phone. Greg was screaming behind the glass, mouthing words I chose not to hear. He was pounding on the partition, desperate to be acknowledged, desperate to matter. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. I did not look back. He was already a ghost. Even though Greg had signed the papers and the handcuffs were tight around his wrists, I knew he was not completely broken yet. As I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, watching him whisper to his new defense attorney, I could see a flicker of arrogant hope in his eyes. Greg was a man who always had a backup plan. In his mind, he was already calculating his comeback. He was thinking about the Cayman Islands account, a secret slush fund containing over $3 million that he had skimmed from the company over the last 5 years. He believed that money was safe. He thought he could use it to hire a dream team for his appeal or, at the very least, live like a king the moment he got out on parole. He caught my eye across the aisle and gave me a small, defiant smirk. It was a look that said he still had an ace up his sleeve. I just touched the silver pendant hanging around my neck and waited. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, peered over the bench. "We are moving to the sentencing phase regarding the financial fraud charges," she stated, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Does the defendant have the means to pay the court-ordered restitution to the victims?" Greg's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket with confidence. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has significant assets held offshore that he is willing to repatriate immediately to demonstrate his remorse. We believe this cooperation should be considered for a reduced sentence." Greg nodded vigorously, looking like a model citizen. He thought he was buying his way out of a cage. Mrs. Sterling, my attorney, stood up slowly. She held a single piece of paper in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "If I may present a new piece of evidence regarding those specific assets." She walked to the bench and handed the paper to the judge, then placed a copy on the defense table in front of Greg. "As of 8 o'clock this morning," Sterling announced, turning to face Greg, "the balance of the account in question is 0. Greg froze. He looked down at the paper, his eyes bulging. What he whispered, his voice trembling. That is impossible. No one has the codes. Actually," I spoke up, my voice soft but carrying clearly in the silent room. "I did. I lifted the USB pendant from my chest." Greg stared at it, and I saw the color drain from his face as the realization hit him like a physical blow. The drive I had clutched in the desert did not just contain evidence of his crimes. It held the digital encryption keys to every single hiding place he had. The money in that account was originally my inheritance, funds he had stolen from our joint savings and hidden away. I had simply taken it back and transferred every cent to the new charitable foundation I had established that morning. "It is gone, Greg," I said. "It is all gone." The last pillar of his world crumbled. He did not scream in anger this time. He made a sound like a wounded animal. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting the heavy wooden table with a thud. He began to sob, deep, racking hebs that shook his entire body. The arrogance was dead. "Order," the judge commanded, banging her gavel. "The defendant will compose himself." Greg could not stop crying. He was finally, truly empty. Given the severity of the fraud and the defendant's attempt to conceal assets, the judge declared, looking down at him with disdain, "I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. 15 years. The number hung in the air. Greg wailed, a pathetic sound that followed me as I turned and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, a light rain was falling, washing the dust from the city streets. It reminded me of the heat of the desert, but this time, the water felt cleansing. A sleek, black limousine pulled up to the curb. As the driver held the door open for me, I saw a figure standing near the entrance, shivering in the drizzle. It was Monica. She looked ragged, her designer clothes wet and wrinkled. She was being jostled by a group of aggressive paparazzi, shielding her face with her handbag. She looked up and saw me. "Elena," she called out, her voice desperate. "Please, I have nowhere to go." I paused for a fraction of a second. I looked at her, then I looked at the warm, dry interior of my car. I did not say a word. I simply slid into the leather seat and pulled the door shut, sealing out the noise and the rain. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" the driver asked. I looked at the digital odometer on the dashboard. "Just drive," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "Let us go exactly 97 miles away from here. I want to see how beautiful the world looks when you are finally free." The car glided forward, leaving the courthouse, the crying ex-husband, and the treacherous mistress in the rearview mirror. I watched the numbers on the odometer tick up. 1 mile, 2 miles. I smiled. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in my life, I was the one behind the wheel. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am curious to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below to let me know, and do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.